Copper Canyon, Mexico. In 1930, while exploring a mine tunnel, a teenage girl unearths two skulls. One of them is oddly misshaped. Radiocarbon dating tests reveal the skull is roughly 900 years old. And according to a dentist who examined the upper jaw, the mysterious relic came from a child no more than 5 years old. Mainstream scientists insist the deformation of what is now known as the Starchild skull is due to a genetic disorder, most likely hydrocephalus, a condition in which an abnormal amount of fluid causes the skull to enlarge. But paranormal researcher and caretaker of the skull, Lloyd Pye, says he has ruled out this possibility based on the skull's unique shape.
Wasn't hydrocephalic because it's clear that if you're hydrocephalic, you blow up like a balloon. You don't blow up with a defined shape and with a crease down the middle. You definitely don't grow up with a crease down the middle between two of your suture lines.
But many researchers are not only baffled by the volume of the skull, which measures more than 10% larger than that of an average adult, but also a number of other characteristics they say are distinctly not human.
The Starchild skull has half the thickness of ordinary human bone, but it's also twice as dense as ordinary human bone, with a consistency more similar to dental enamel. It has bizarre, thick strands in it, almost like there's some extra powerful weave inside the bone. It also has this bizarre reddish residue that appears to be similar to bone marrow, but very different from what we normally see.
There are no sinus cavities, for instance. There are many attachments inside the skull for tendons that human beings don't have. And it appears to be some sort of hybridization. It's part human, but also part something else.
When the Starchild skull is subjected to forensic reconstruction, the face that is produced appears eerily similar to descriptions of gray aliens.
It has all the physical attributes that are typically described by people who have encounters or allege that they have encounters with gray aliens. It has very unusual eyes. It has expanded parietals. It has a crease down the middle. It has a very, very narrow lower face. Plus, it has that monster brain in that head.
Lloyd Pye launched what he calls the Starchild Project, working with independent researchers to determine exactly who or what this unusual skull belonged to. According to him, DNA tests carried out by Trace Genetics in 2003 revealed shocking results. While scientists uncovered mitochondrial DNA, or DNA inherited solely from the mother, they were unable to detect nuclear DNA, or DNA from both the mother and father.
When we tried to recover the Starchild's nuclear DNA, in 6 attempts, no recovery. So at that time, what that obviously indicated was if the Starchild's mitochondrial DNA was recoverable, that meant it had a human mother. And if its nuclear DNA was not recoverable, then there was something wrong with the father's DNA. Because if the father had been human, you would have had as easy a recovery of it as you did of the human mother. So we knew right then in 2003, something was very wrong with at least Dad. And so we formed the assumption, based on the evidence, that it was a human-alien hybrid with a human mother and an alien father.
Bulgaria's Black Sea coast, July 2010. Here, in the ruins of a medieval church on St. Ivan Island, 6 small human bone fragments are discovered inside a marble sarcophagus. Through radiocarbon dating and DNA testing of one knuckle bone, scientists conclude that the bones are from the 1st century AD. But what is even more incredible is the belief by many that the bones are actually those of St. John the Baptist.
In Christianity, John the Baptist is specifically important because he is known as the forerunner, the precursor, the one who comes before the Messiah. And in the stories of John the Baptist, he becomes extremely important for Christians because he announces that a greater Messiah is coming after him. And the legends around John's bones were always legends of extreme power. John was a prophet.
Now on tour in churches throughout Bulgaria, tens of thousands of the faithful come to visit, pray, and even worship these tiny bone fragments. But why? What is it about ancient bones, even those thought to have belonged to a saint, that compel people to come and visit them? Could it be they possess some mystical or otherworldly power?
The idea of saints' bones and relics having power is something that goes back to the very early days of Christianity. And certainly in the latter part of the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages, they became very big business. If you had saints' relics in your church or in your cathedral, you could bring in a lot of pilgrims who would also bring in a lot of donations. There was a strong belief by the nobility and the royalty that the bones of these saints actually did contain some kind of power.
Humans always want to worship their celebrities, their kings. Whatever was linked with mysteries, humans worshipped it. So in antiquity, it entered already into altars. When a high priest died, part of his body, part of his bones was sometimes separated, brought to different countries, and everyone worshipped the bone in an altar. That's still happening in Christianity.
Kushinagar, India, 483 BC. Siddhartha Gautama, the great spiritual teacher upon whom Buddhism is founded, dies. According to legend, after Buddha was cremated, several small pieces of his body remained intact and were retrieved from the ashes.
After his cremation, the ashes were fought over by a lot of his disciples. And finally, they resolved the problem by dividing them into 8 different parts. When the Buddha's ashes were divided, and there's a claim that there's a tooth found there, it was considered as very valuable. Right away, when the tooth was given to a king, the relic, the tooth relic itself, became associated with the power of kingship. And it is believed that the king who possesses the tooth would be able to rule properly, and there would be peace and prosperity in his kingdom.
Could such a tiny but tangible relic from the mouth of the dead Buddha really have such power? Is a physical link to a holy and venerated leader really a means of connecting to the afterlife, and even more profoundly, some divine life force?
The worship of relics actually is as old as the Buddha's religion itself, and many other religions too. The Buddha himself approves of the worship of relics because he believes that his followers need something very concrete to remind them of his presence and his teachings. The relics are supposed to be actually the essence of the saints. So in a way, the relics are the saints themselves, so they have the powers of the saints.
The importance here is, why is it that objects like this can gain such an incredible spiritual value? And quite clearly, it's to do with the psychology of the importance of individuals like the Buddha, who are seen to be personifications of God or the gods themselves, and that just to own this or to have some part of it imbues you with the same power as the gods themselves.
Lovelock, Nevada. In the early 1800s, local legends passed down by the Paiute Indians told of a race of giants who were exterminated by their tribe. It is said this was done by trapping the giants in a cave, shooting arrows at them, and then starting a large fire at the mouth of the cave. Evidence of the slaughter lay undisturbed until the early 20th century.
Lovelock Cave was first discovered by local ranchers who were looking for bat guano to use in their fields.
In need of fertilizer for their crops, the ranchers removed nearly 10 feet of guano-enriched soil from the surface of the cave.
And then they began finding human remains. They found up to 40 or 50 people inside this cave. One was allegedly 7 feet, 7 inches tall. They all had long, red hair and were literal giants.
If these skeletons were the remains of the legendary red-haired giants, were they visitors from distant continents?
Throughout the 19th century, many giant skeletons were allegedly discovered in the Midwest, also in parts of California and around Death Valley. And the skeletons here found at Lovelock are one of the few that were really excavated by an accredited university.
Archaeologists from the Nevada Historical Society and the University of California believe the cave was occupied from approximately 1500 BC until a few hundred years before white men appeared in the Nevada Territory. 75 miles from the cave site, a local museum has preserved several skulls that some believe are recovered remains of the giants.
Inside this cabinet here are 3 skulls from the Lovelock Caves. When you first see these skulls, they seem to be pretty much normal-looking skulls. However, it's when we really start to compare the jaw bones with this modern dental impression of a normal adult male that we see that these jaw bones are unusually large. And these are really the skulls of giant people who were perhaps 7, even 8 feet tall. One of the odd things with these skulls is that they're not actually put on display here at the museum, and they're kept hidden in this cabinet. Now, we don't know if that's really just out of respect for the Native Americans, or whether there's really something unusual about these giant skulls that they don't want them to display.
Are the Nevada bones evidence of a race of giants that existed all through early human history? If so, could the giants be the descendants of extraterrestrials? According to the Hebrew Testament, one such giant appeared in the valley of Elah 2,500 years ago. Each morning for 40 days, a Philistine giant over 9 feet tall challenged the Israelites to a fight. His name was Goliath.
David and Goliath is one of those episodes in the Bible where you wonder what is going on. Is it just a metaphor, or are we dealing with a fundamental interpretation? And in that sense, Goliath has to be a giant creature. The question then is, he cannot be human, what is he?
David's stunning triumph over Goliath was considered a mere fable. until archaeologists turned up evidence that suggests this confrontation really did happen. On the outskirts of Tel Asaf, Israel, scientists discovered a moat that may have once protected the Philistine fortress. Nearby, they found shards of pottery inscribed with the name Goliath. Tests indicate the pottery is from the same time period as described in the Bible. Ancient astronaut theorists claim this is unmistakable evidence of extraterrestrial giants in biblical times. And they say there is much more. The most common megalithic construction known is the dolmen. Believed to be burial chambers, they are found throughout Europe, the Middle East, South America, and Asia. Could these megastructures be the ruins of giants?
Archaeology likes to use the word dolmen, but they were formerly known in folklore as giants' graves.
A dolmen is shaped like the Greek letter pi with the top on it. And they're made of enormous blocks of limestone. And even today, we are marveled that anyone could construct those things and wondered how they got the top on top of the uprights. And those were built during the Middle Bronze period, which is roughly 2000 to 1500 before the Common Era. So seeing things like that, people questioned, those must have been made by giants. I mean, ordinary people could not have done that.
Are we dealing with metaphors or are we dealing with hard evidence? Are these physical creatures which somehow roamed the earth? And I think on volume, we have to accept that some of these were real. The question then is, how did these genetic freaks come about?
South Africa. 25 miles northwest of Johannesburg lie the Malapa Caves. Here, in August of 2008, paleoanthropologist Lee Berger and his 9-year-old son Matthew discover several fossilized skeletal remains of 2-million-year-old early humans, including a female adult and male child, perhaps a mother and son. The size and shape of the bones indicate that the individuals walked upright and had modern hands. Over the past several decades, scientists have unearthed the remains of nearly 24 different types of early human ancestors, all known as hominids.
We have an extremely good fossil record of ancient hominids. And I think the picture emerging from it is pretty clear that in earlier days, before Homo sapiens came along, there were typically many different kinds of hominids coexisting in the world.
We have a hard time getting our minds around this now because, of course, there's just one kind of human on Earth today and there are 7 billion of us. But at one time, within the last few 100,000 years, you could find 2 or even 3 species of hominin living in the same area at the same time.
Most mainstream scholars tell us hominids evolved from an ape ancestor nearly 6 million years ago through what is referred to as natural selection. This theory of evolution was first popularized by English anthropologist Charles Darwin in his 1859 book On the Origin of Species.
Darwin's mechanism of evolution was natural selection. That is to say, a long-term process whereby better adapted individuals reproduce more successfully.
Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection explained that organisms with certain traits, such as mutation, turn out to be actually beneficial, turn out to be of advantage in the struggle for reproduction. So mutation allow organisms to survive and to pass on to the next generation this mutation.
Darwin speculated that over time, hominids walking on 2 feet used their hands to make tools. This in turn made them smarter. Then, approximately 200,000 years ago, hominids evolved into Homo sapiens, or modern man. But many scholars dispute Darwin's findings.
We don't see dolphins building cars. We don't see elephants building houses. That might sound trite, but it's a fact that these animals just simply haven't progressed and advanced in the way we have. And the big question is, why is that? Why should that happen? Why should we be so unique?
Tool use doesn't really come into play for several million years after the first earliest humans began to walk upright. And then brain size doesn't really begin to expand and really mushroom in size until the last several 100,000 years. So actually, 6 million years of human evolution, there are millions of years separating each of those major features: upright posture, tool use, brain expansion. So Darwin was wrong because he couldn't possibly have known the chronology in his day.
In 1967, British zoologist Desmond Morris argued against Darwin's theories on evolution in his book, The Naked Ape. In it, Morris wrote that there was no reason why man stood alone from other species in terms of his nudity.
Well, of course, as Homo sapiens, we still continue to have a coating of hair, but that hair is very much reduced over most of our bodies. And that reduction probably goes back way beyond Homo sapiens in time. It probably goes back to the time when the very first early bipedal hominids came out of the forests in Africa into the savannas, where they had more sun and more thermal radiation to cope with.
In places like Europe, Northern Europe, why we lost body hair, it's a chicken and egg question. Did we lose our body hair because we began to wear clothing to keep us warm? Or was there some other factor at work that caused us to lose our body hair? Perhaps women didn't find body hair on men attractive, and so it was lost because they didn't choose those men as mates. There's no way to ever answer that question.
If we were to subscribe 100% to the idea of survival of the fittest, isn't it illogical to think that all of a sudden we're completely naked and we're losing all of our fur? I mean, that makes absolutely no sense, because right after we shed our fur, we had to wear furs to keep warm. Had we not worn any furs, we would have frozen to death, we would have died. So the whole idea that we shed all of our hair in order to survive because we were stronger, logically, makes no sense.
But if Darwin's theory of natural selection cannot account for the appearance of intelligent hairless Homo sapiens, what can? Might the transition of hominids to modern human beings have been the result of an otherworldly design, as ancient astronaut theorists believe? Alfred Russel Wallace, a colleague of Darwin, called it the intelligence evolution.
Darwin believed that the human brain had been driven into existence by natural selection, but Wallace couldn't quite see how this could be so. What Wallace perceived was that the way that humans think, their intellectual faculties, are qualitatively different from anything that had preceded them. And he couldn't quite see how this enormous gap could be bridged by natural selection. So he invoked another explanation for the evolution, the arrival of modern human cognitive abilities. His choice was a spiritual explanation.